I'm Elliot Chodoff, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Hi, and welcome. It's September 19th, early afternoon here in Israel. Nothing is blown up yet in Beirut today, but the day is still young. Over the past 2 days, first 2 days ago, a whole bunch of Hezbollah's beepers went off, so to speak, blowing up on their hips, in their hands, in their faces. And yesterday, a whole bunch of their walkie-talkies went. What will happen today? Well, as you know, I don't do prophecy, but what I do want to talk about is, first, certain aspects of the nature of what happened. And here I'm not going to be giving away any secrets or background or how it was done, but rather what we know for sure. And more importantly, looking at some of the consequences and the ramifications locally and across the region and to the world as countries like the United States and the European countries weigh in, some of them less nonsensically and some of them more so. So, first starting with the beepers, but we can say pretty much the same about the walkie-talkies. The attack was both broad-based and very, very specific. The elegance, if you will, of this beeper attack is an extension of an operation that Israel used many years ago in the 1990s against a Hamas terrorist nicknamed the Engineer, Yahya Ayash, in a successful attempt to take him out after he built some of the early bombs that went off in Israel lethally in the 1990s. And that was to pair an explosive with the battery in his cell phone, very, very small explosive because it didn't need to be very large. He very conveniently held it against his head. And when he was called and asked if it was him, he said yes. And that was pretty much the end of the phone call and of the Engineer. So here we have something very, very similar. The charges were even smaller. The primary purpose clearly was not to kill, although that was a positive byproduct in a number of cases. Hezbollah is reporting dozens. The IDF is estimating a higher number. Significantly, Hezbollah is reporting deaths of its members, and although there are some reports of non-combatants being killed by it, Hezbollah is not making that report, and that's interesting in and of itself. But nonetheless, we're talking about minimally dozens and possibly hundreds of Hezbollah, not just terrorists, but leaders, and I'll come back to that in a moment, who were taken out by this very, very small charge that was essentially addressed specifically to the recipient. In other words, by the fact that that person was carrying a beeper. So what does it all mean from the local, regional, and global point of view? Well, let's start with the local. Hezbollah suffered a tremendous setback, and without going into the endless memes that have come out, not only by the pro-Israel crowd, and not only in the West, but also in the Arab world, where there's, in many places, no love lost for Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been horrifically humiliated 2 days in a row, and totalitarian, fascist states, governments, and organizations, and Hezbollah falls into that category, can't afford to be humiliated. Most countries can't. Most organizations can't. They can't even more so than others since their power rests very heavily on their power, prestige, their myth of invincibility, especially as a jihadi organization, that Allah is with them, Khomeini is with them, everybody on high is with them, and apparently somebody managed to get in under the tent flap and blow up all of their beepers and walkie-talkies. So the humiliation here is important. It's part of the conflict within Lebanon between Hezbollah and other segments of the population, which would certainly like to see Hezbollah removed, certainly defanged, but humiliated is a good step and a good start, and that hurts them. It hurts them badly. Second, the consequence of so many injuries, casualties, means that Lebanon's hospitals, particularly the trauma units and their units dealing with this type of injury, are full. So that if fighting breaks out on any large scale in the immediate future, and I'm not going to surmise, but it looks like we're moving in that direction, Hezbollah has no place to send its casualties. And this is going to have a major effect, and they can't even throw out the people in the wards to make room, because the people in the wards are their people who are already wounded. So they're caught in the horns of a terrifically difficult dilemma in terms of how to deal with potential wounded fighters and others in the case of a widespread outbreak. Next, the injuries themselves, and who are they? Keeping in mind that these were the beeper carriers, and if the numbers are correct, about 5,000 of them. This was not the rank and file. Now, it also raises kind of interesting questions, like why was the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon carrying a Hezbollah beeper? But let's leave that as an aside for a moment. It gives us an idea of who is in the loop. Leaders, important staff people, commanders, and it may go down to junior commanders, to the equivalent of company and platoon leaders. But once again, it wasn't the average shooter or bomber or rocket launcher who was carrying these beepers and these walkie-talkies. There were people in positions of authority. I'm going to say key, not in the sense of high in the hierarchy, but in some cases, a company commander in an area can be more key to that area's operations than somebody 2 levels higher up. They were all the ones who were affected. The wounds inflicted, leaving aside those who were killed, are debilitating. The reports are that some 200 were blinded. Others we saw had the beepers go off on their hips, hip injuries, organ injuries, peritonitis, and assorted other puncture and burn injuries in that area. And I won't go into the speculation of what else, what other effects it had. But the point is that these are not people who are going to be back in the field in the next 48 to 72 hours. They have treatment ahead of them and then rehabilitation ahead of them. In the long term, they may come back if they survive the experience. In other words, a year from now or 2 years from now, they may be able to return to their positions. But in the immediate future, in other words, the crisis future of the next weeks even, they have been taken out. Particularly hard hit, apparently, were the Redwan force. For those who are not familiar, Redwan was the nom de guerre of Imad Mughniyeh, the combat leader of Hezbollah from the 1980s, who was responsible, among other things, for the bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, and Israeli targets as well, the Israeli command center in Tyre twice, among other things, until he was sent on to a better place from Damascus in an operation that has been reported as a joint Israeli-American operation. We both had long open accounts with him some 15 years ago. His replacement, by the way, Fuad Shukr, was the fellow we took out a couple months ago in Beirut, the night that Ismail Haniyeh was taken out in Tehran. In any event, the Redwan force, to come back, is an assault force that is deployed along the Israeli border, whose primary mission was to cross the border and take Israeli villages, very much in the model that Hamas copied and actually used on October 7th. For the last decade or so, we've been much more concerned about that scenario happening along the northern border with the Redwan force, which is one of the reasons why 100,000 Israelis were evacuated immediately after the 7th, in order to preclude sort of October 7th version 2.0 happening on the 9th or the 10th by the Redwan force along the Lebanese border. In any event, they were apparently very hard hit, and that doesn't take them out of the game, but it certainly puts them at a disadvantage for the immediate short-term future. It'll be very difficult for them to appoint competent leaders to replace the many who were taken out in this operation. Further along the way, there's a huge psychological operational hit that Hezbollah took. I said earlier that 2 days ago, we whoever it was, we took out the beepers. Yesterday, it was the walkie-talkies. And now everybody is wondering what's going to happen today. Now, if nothing happens today, that's not the end of the story, because it could happen tomorrow or the next day or the day after that. And while all of that anticipation is building among the leadership of Hezbollah, they must be wondering what else might be booby-trapped. Laptops? Tablets? Regular phones? Other electronics? Not electronics? And with all the memes going around up to and including carrier pigeons, they've now caught not only the dilemma of how do they communicate, but also in the throes of self-suspicion, in the sense of who do we trust, who can we trust, who can't we trust, and just as importantly, what can we trust before something blows up again in our faces. The Europeans, of course, are horrified. How could Israel possibly have the temerity, the chutzpah, to actually strike back at Hezbollah after nearly a year of rocket and anti-tank fire and drone attacks, blowing things up all over northern Israel, burning a good part of Israel, northern Israel, forests and nature reserves to the ground? How can the Jews really have the nerve to strike back and maybe even try to take back the initiative? So I'm not going to deal with the Europeans. The Europeans are happy when the Jews are in camps, and I'm going to leave it at that, which is why many of them voted yesterday in the UN for a resolution calling for an arms embargo against Israel, and the ones who didn't vote for it abstained, with the notable exception of Hungary and the Czech Republic. All the rest of Europe, as far as I'm concerned, at best is bad, and it gets worse from there. The United States, on the other hand, doesn't fall into that category, and they're horrified as well. First of all, nobody told them. Well, too bad, because we knew very well that if anybody told America, they would leak it, and that would be the end of that story. Nobody trusts the security tightness of America today, and it's not just because of the administration. It's been all American administrations going back for a couple of decades. They don't keep Israeli secrets. There's no reason for Israel to tell them any. But America is still bent on a diplomatic solution. America considers the whole conflict between Israel and Hezbollah to be a minor territorial conflict. They don't understand what the whole thing is about. And all we really need to do is sit down, come to an agreement, end the Israeli offensive in Gaza, bring home the hostages, and Hezbollah will revert to the Western liberal democratic organization it always has been. And then we can do some land swaps in the Galilee and Lebanon. We give them land, they give us promises. That's the American version of a land swap. And we'll all live happily ever after. Peace in our time. It worked so well in Munich. There's no reason why it can't work here. And here, typical American response 30, 50, 70, 100 Hezbollah rockets a day into northern Israel is routine. Israel takes the initiative, and here we are, there's an escalation. Well, it's escalating. Israel's moving the 98th Division, the Commando Division, up from Gaza to the northern border. Troops are on alert. The Army High Command and the Ministry of Defense have said we're shifting gears. Now, none of this is inevitable, but Israel has now sort of turned the corner and said, okay, you want to come to an agreement? Now is the time to come to an agreement. You want to respond? You want to turn this into something bigger? We're ready for it. And if that's the only way we can move Hezbollah off the northern border, that's the way we're going to do it. So in summary, a major shift, an Israeli offensive, although an unconventional one, a very precise, targeted one, taking out, I'll say again, key terrorist leaders of Hezbollah and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Lebanon and in Syria, and setting Hezbollah back, rocking it back on its heels, and putting the ball in their court now. Do you come around to some sort of an agreement that not only the Israeli government can agree to, but also the 100,000 Israelis who want to go back to their homes to feel safe enough to agree to? Or do they want to escalate and see what else Israel has up its sleeve? No predictions. Time will tell. We're going to keep watching. So, once again, it's September 19th, afternoon here in Israel. We're waiting for the event of the rest of the day. And in the meantime, stay engaged, stay safe. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.